The rain over Buckinghamshire fell like static, a soft hiss over a world of secrets. Through the cracked window panes of a low brick building surrounded by barbed wire, the lights of Bletchley Park burned deep into the night. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke, the low hum of electric heaters and the frantic rhythm of typewriter keys. It was the sound of minds fighting a war no one could see. A young woman in uniform, her hands trembling, leaned over a strip of coded text just fed through the teleprinter. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, silence. The machine stopped. The ink ribbon stilled. She stared at the sequence of letters and felt the chill of understanding crawl down her spine. Her throat tightened. "You'd better get Commander Travis," she whispered. Moments later, a door slammed open. Boots echoed across the wooden floorboards. Cryptanalysts, mathematicians, and linguists converged around the single page, a radio intercept crackling through from the German High Command. A few words decrypted, then a line, then a sentence. The room froze. Across the decoded page, the Reich's secret orders for the Atlantic spelled out something no Allied mind had dared imagine. A move so audacious, so catastrophic it could tilt the entire war overnight. A kettle whistled in the background. Someone switched it off without a word. Every pencil dropped. Every clock ticked louder. And then in that silent, suffocating room, as the rain beat harder against the glass, one voice spoke. "God help them all. It's the convoy." Fade to black. The war and the world would never be the same again. It began with static, a whisper from the air itself, captured by a long wire stretching across a sodden English field. The wireless operators of the WWII service, stationed along the coasts of Britain, didn't know what they were intercepting most days. Their headphones filled with the disjointed chatter of the Luftwaffe, the U-boat fleet, and the encrypted pulse of German High Command. They copied it down, every code, every pause, every fragment, and relayed it to one name whispered like a spell: Bletchley. By 1941, Bletchley Park was a world unto itself. A maze of huts, each dedicated to secrets so compartmentalized that even those within them had no idea what the others were doing. Hut 6 cracked the Army and Air Force Enigma. Hut 8, led by Alan Turing and Hugh Alexander, wrestled with the naval variant, a more complex, more vicious cipher. Between them sat endless cups of tea, chalk-covered blackboards, and an unrelenting belief that in numbers lay salvation. The men and women who filled those huts were mathematicians, linguists, crossword champions, and chess prodigies. They worked 16-hour days under the Official Secrets Act, knowing that one slip could undo everything. The war was not fought only with rifles and bombs. It was fought with logic, probability, and silence. In January 1941, the Atlantic War was spiraling out of control. The German U-boats, the Grey Wolves, were hunting Allied convoys across the North Atlantic with ruthless efficiency. Each ship sunk meant food, fuel, and munitions lost. Each convoy broken was a lifeline severed between Britain and America. Churchill called it the only thing that really frightened me during the war. And deep within Hut 8, Turing's team knew that the only way to fight those wolves was to see them first, to read their orders before they struck. But the Kriegsmarine Enigma had changed. The Germans had introduced a new fourth rotor, altering the mechanical heart of the machine. The Codebreakers' entire system, months of analysis, algorithms, and mechanical bombs fell silent overnight. Turing's face remained unreadable, but those who knew him said they saw a shadow there, not of fear but of obsession. Every night he paced the floors of Hut 8, scribbling equations on scraps of paper, muttering through the permutations. The Enigma was no longer just a machine. It was a living enemy, adapting and outsmarting them at every turn. Meanwhile, across the channel in the port of Lorient, Admiral Karl Dönitz prepared a move that would soon send shockwaves through Bletchley Park. It was called Operation Paukenschlag, drumbeat. It was not merely another U-boat campaign. It was the beginning of the Battle of the Atlantic's darkest chapter, an onslaught that would carry the war to America's own coastlines. At Bletchley, no one yet knew the name. But the intercepts were changing. Longer bursts, different call signs, the faint pattern of coordination on frequencies previously silent. Something vast was forming beneath the noise. On February 2nd, a burst from a U-boat transmission was captured off the western coast of Ireland. The message, enciphered through the naval Enigma, was short but peculiar. The indicator settings, the preamble to each code, contained an anomaly. One of the WWII operators, Margaret Rock, noticed it as she logged the intercept. A single letter out of place. She didn't know why, but she flagged it. Hours later, the slip landed in the hands of Joan Clark, one of Turing's closest colleagues. Clark, calm and methodical, traced the anomaly through the codebooks, cross-referencing hundreds of messages from the previous weeks. Then she saw it, what a repetition that should not have existed. A careless operator somewhere in the Atlantic had reused a setting. It was a rare gift, a crack in the armor. The bombs whirred to life again, those great electromechanical beasts built from brass, wire, and hope. Each one clicked through thousands of possible rotor positions every second, hunting for a single alignment that would make sense of the gibberish. The sound filled the room like the heartbeat of the war itself, relentless, mechanical, inhuman. And then, a pause. A machine stopped mid-cycle. A light flickered. The letters on the test printout began to form a pattern. Not words yet, but structure. Within the hour, the first fragments of the naval Enigma were readable again. The decrypted text, once reconstructed, revealed something chilling. U-boat wolf packs were being redirected west, toward convoys approaching the American coast. This was not random. It was the opening of a new front in the Atlantic. The Germans had learned that American coastal cities still blazed with lights at night, that ships sailed silhouetted against them like targets. It would be a slaughter. When the first decrypted dispatch reached the Admiralty in London, the reaction was instant and visceral. The room did not erupt in shouts, it fell silent. Admiral Godfrey himself leaned forward, his knuckles white on the desk. The Intercept bore Donitz's personal signature. It wasn't a rumor. It was fact. The U-boats were coming, in force. That night, while most of Britain slept under blackout, Bletchley Park did not sleep at all. The cryptanalysts worked through the hours, decoding the names of U-boat captains, their coordinates, and their fuel limits. The messages read like the diary of a predator. Group Seawolf to patrol grid square DN61. Attack on convoy. HX-229 authorized. It was the first time the Allies had seen the inner mind of the U-boat war laid bare. But then came the most extraordinary message of all. The one that would later be called the Intercept that changed the war. It was transmitted on the night of March 10, 1941, and captured by a Y station in Scarborough. The message was longer than usual, over 200 groups of ciphered letters. It was rushed, the operator making small transmission errors. When it reached Bletchley, the analysts could tell something urgent was within it. Turing and Clark worked side by side, the room thick with tension. Every tick of the clock meant ships at sea, lives hanging on the outcome. After hours of reconstruction, a sentence emerged. It described a planned mass interception of an Allied convoy, 37 merchant ships with minimal escort, due to cross into a region where no Allied aircraft could yet reach. The U-boats were to converge there, 10 of them, waiting in a crescent pattern. The Germans called it Rudelstellung, the wolf formation. The convoy's code name appeared next. Convoy HX-229, the time, the position, the plan, all there. Every detail of the attack was laid bare on the page. Commander Travis was called from his quarters in the early hours of dawn. He read the sheet twice, then once more. "Get this to the Admiralty," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "And for God's sake, make sure they believe it." By the next evening, Royal Navy Command in Liverpool had ordered convoy HX-229 to alter course. 2 additional destroyers were dispatched from Iceland to meet it. Air cover was extended where possible. It was the first time in the entire Atlantic campaign that the Allies moved in direct response to a decrypted German plan. The result would not be perfect, war never is, but it would be decisive. When the Wolfpack attacked days later, they found not helpless merchantmen but an alerted, defended line of ships bristling with depth charges and sonar. Several U-boats were sunk, the rest scattered. The Allies had survived what could have been their greatest single loss at sea. In the days that followed, inside Hut 8, there was no celebration, only exhaustion. Turing and Clark barely spoke, their faces drawn and pale from the endless strain, but word spread quietly among the staff. The Intercept had worked. Lives had been saved. The tide had turned, if only slightly. Outside, spring was breaking over Buckinghamshire. The air was still cold, but the frost had begun to retreat from the lawns. The war was far from over, but for the first time the machines at Bletchley Park had whispered back victory. The sea at night was a living thing, vast, indifferent, infinite. Beneath its surface, metal predators moved in silence. Each U-boat, long and narrow as a spear, glided through the black water with engines barely idling, its commander peering through the periscope as the phosphorescent wake curled off the bow like smoke. In those depths, men became shadows. Voices were whispers. The Atlantic swallowed everything. Light, hope, even the sound of prayer. The Germans called them Die Grauen Wölfe, the Grey Wolves. And they hunted not for glory, but for annihilation. Under Admiral Karl Dönitz, the U-boat arm of the Kriegsmarine had grown into a doctrine. The Rudel tactic, the wolf pack formation that turned the sea into a chessboard of death. One boat would sight a convoy and stalk it in silence, signaling the others. Then in the dark hours before dawn, the wolves would converge, attacking in waves. Merchant ships burned like lanterns in the night. Survivors clung to wreckage, their screams carried on the wind until even the sea forgot them. By early 1941, the Allies were bleeding. Convoys from Halifax and Liverpool sailed under constant threat. The Black Pit, a stretch of the North Atlantic beyond the range of Allied aircraft, was a graveyard. The Germans ruled it without mercy. But at Bletchley Park, the invisible war had found its voice. The decrypts from Hut 8 were now feeding daily into the Operational Intelligence Center in London. Every time an Enigma key was broken, a flood of information poured through: positions, bearings, signals traffic, even fuel estimates. It was as though Dönitz's own war diary had been opened on the Allied desk. And yet it was fragile, terrifyingly so. The German operators changed Enigma keys every 24 hours. If the bombs failed, even for a day, the Allies would once again be deaf and blind. The Codebreakers could never stop. Inside Hut 8, exhaustion became a kind of madness. Turing, his shirt collar open and hair uncombed, spent days without sleep. He spoke in numbers, in probabilities, in sentences no one could fully follow. The bombs rattled endlessly, their rotating drums turning like the hands of time itself. When one broke down, WAF mechanics repaired it on the spot, soldering circuits with fingers blistered from heat. Then, one night, the static returned. The same tone, the same faint click, from a German transmission station in Brest. A message had been sent in error, half-coded, half-plaintext. Clark's eyes widened as she traced the sequence. It was the name of a wolf pack, Hecht, and a list of coordinates. The decrypted fragment was enough to predict their movement. The Admiralty sent a warning to convoy OB-318, a string of merchant ships bound for America. It was already far at sea, escorted by only a few destroyers. If the warning reached them in time, they could change course and avoid the trap. That night over the Atlantic, the convoy sailed through fog thicker than smoke. On the destroyer HMS Bulldog, Captain Joe Baker Cresswell scanned the horizon. His crew was tense. They had received the signal from London, but no sight yet of the enemy. The men on deck whispered of wolves in the mist, then in a flash. A torpedo trail cutting white through the black water. Hard to port. The Bulldog swung wide, the torpedo passing astern by meters. Depth charges roared into the sea, blooming columns of water into the fog. A moment later, a shuddering explosion, and the distant scream of ruptured steel. One of the U-boats had been caught. The Bulldog's crew would later haul from the water several German sailors, half-conscious, soaked in oil. Among the wreckage, they found something far more valuable than men: a set of Enigma materials. The waterproof case was dented, its locks broken by pressure. Inside lay code tables, signal logs, and a working naval Enigma machine, the first ever captured intact. When word reached Bletchley Park, the effect was electric. Turing read the Admiralty's report in silence, his face unreadable. Then, for the first time in months, he smiled. "That," he said softly, "changes everything." The device was rushed under guard to Buckinghamshire. It arrived wrapped in oilcloth, water still dripping from its keys. The moment the crate opened, the smell of salt and metal filled the hut. The machine gleamed under lamplight, its rotors intact. Clark ran her fingers over the engraved letters, reverent as though touching a relic. Within hours, the Codebreakers were feeding in intercepted cipher groups, testing settings against the real rotors. The results came faster, cleaner. For the first time, they could see the mind behind the machine. Messages that had taken days to decipher now fell in hours. From that moment, Bletchley Park's reach extended across the Atlantic. The Allies could now anticipate U-boat operations weeks ahead, track their supply ships, predict rendezvous, even ambush refueling points. The hunters had become the hunted, but Dönitz was no fool. Reports of failed patrols reached him quickly. He suspected leaks, traitors, or faulty communications. He ordered the cipher system changed again. New rotors, new indicators. Once more, Bletchley went dark. The blackout lasted nearly 3 months. It was during those months that the Battle of Convoy SC-42 unfolded, one of the deadliest of the war. 65 ships bound from Nova Scotia, carrying grain and steel, found themselves in the open Atlantic without reliable air cover. The Wolfpack Markgraf, 10 U-boats strong, fell upon them in a coordinated strike. Over 3 nights, 14 ships were sunk. Flames stretched for miles, lighting the waves like firelight over a grave. The radio operator on one merchant vessel sent a final transmission. "We're hit. God save the others." At Bletchley, the Codebreakers could only listen. The Enigma remained silent to them. It was the cruelest kind of helplessness, to know that within those encrypted signals answers existed that could have saved lives, but to be unable to reach them. Alan Turing sat alone in Hut 8 as the news came in. He did not speak. He did not weep. He returned to his desk and began writing. Equations, probability chains, mechanical designs. From that grief came his next invention, the Banburismus process, a probabilistic analysis that could infer likely rotor positions even without complete intercepts. It was a turning point, the bridge that would reopen Enigma once more. By early 1942, the tide began to turn again. The bombs hummed with new algorithms. Hut 8's walls filled with charts, graphs, and code names. Each intercept was no longer a riddle but a heartbeat, the rhythm of an enemy losing its edge. One decrypted message stood out. It was sent from Dönitz himself to a U-boat group designated Zitadel. The tone was desperate, the words cautious. All operations west of Greenland to proceed with maximum silence. Loss is unacceptable. Allied detection suspected. Bletchley read it as proof. The Germans knew they were being read, but not how. From then on, every successful decrypt became a dance of secrecy. The Admiralty was forbidden to act too quickly on information. If convoys altered course too predictably, the Germans might deduce the truth. Ships were sometimes sacrificed to preserve the illusion. It was an unbearable burden, knowing where death would strike, and being unable to always warn. In those moments, the brilliance of Bletchley Park was matched only by its quiet agony. The women who manned the teleprinters never saw the sea, but they felt its toll. Each night as messages came in, they listened to the endless repetition of call signs, knowing some belonged to men already lost. They typed through tears, through exhaustion, through fear. Their names would never appear in the newspapers, but history was written in their fingertips. In the spring of 1942, a new hope arrived from America. The Western Approach's tactical unit in Liverpool began coordinating with Bletchley's decrypts in real time. Each decoded message was plotted onto massive ocean maps. Pins moved across blue grids like living things, tracing U-boat routes. For the first time, the Allied war room could see the battle unfolding, not hours later, but as it happened. It was there that the intercept from Bletchley Park, the one that had saved convoy HX-229, became legend. Officers spoke of it in whispers, calling it the message that made the ocean speak. It proved that intelligence could shape the tides themselves. The U-boats still prowled, but now their shadows were shorter. Convoys began to arrive intact. The tonnage lost each month began to fall. It was not yet victory, but it was survival. Back in Bletchley, the staff never saw the convoys. They saw only numbers, coordinates, call signs. But one night, a small envelope arrived from the Admiralty addressed to Hut 8. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy shot taken from the deck of a merchant ship entering Liverpool harbor, hull scarred, smoke still rising from its funnels. Across the back, written in pencil, were 5 words. "Because of you and we lived." Turing pinned it to the wall. He didn't speak of it, but he looked at it often. The world outside Bletchley Park was fire and thunder. But inside those low wooden huts, the war was waged in whispers, ink, and light. Each intercepted signal, Each typed message, each coded string of letters was a battle in miniature. It was a war fought in silence, a front unseen by the men who bled for it. And yet, without it, the Allies would have been blind. In the spring of 1942, Bletchley Park had become an empire of thought. Over 6,000 people now worked there. Mathematicians from Cambridge, linguists from Oxford, chess champions, clerks, engineers, and hundreds of women from the Women's Royal Naval Service, WRNS, the ATS, and the WWII. Every corridor echoed with the low murmur of voices, the click of typewriters, the shuffle of paper. Yet each person knew only a fraction of the whole. Don't ask, the signs read. Don't tell. Secrecy was survival. The huts were numbered, but not in sequence. Hut 3 decoded Army messages. Hut 4 handled the Navy. Hut 6 wrestled with Luftwaffe Enigma. Hut 8 was Turing's domain, the naval heart of the Code War. Between them ran couriers clutching envelopes stamped most secret. They carried not weapons but fragments of truth, small, precise, deadly. The war had entered a phase of shadows. The Germans had redoubled their cryptographic efforts, changing ciphers and protocols almost weekly. The Enigma was no longer their only shield. They now used the Lorenz SC40 cipher machine, a monstrous teleprinter encryption system used for the highest-level communications between Hitler's high command and field marshals in occupied Europe. It was faster, more complex, and utterly unbreakable, or so they believed. In August 1941, a single mistake changed everything. A German operator at a relay station near Athens retransmitted a message because of a bad line. He sent it twice, same text, same key settings, but abbreviated words differently the second time. The two encrypted versions reached Bletchley Park days later, recorded by WWII service. The analysts laid them side by side and realized the operator had given them a miracle. By comparing the two, they could extract patterns that revealed the inner logic of the Lorenz cipher. It fell to a team led by John Tiltman and Bill Tutt to unravel it. Tiltman, a veteran codebreaker, began by hand, comparing thousands of letters, calculating probable key streams with nothing more than paper and pencil. Tutt, a young mathematician barely 24, saw what no one else did. The Lorenz machine's structure could be deduced logically, without ever seeing it. Bit by bit, he mapped its hidden rotors, and 12 in all, and their wiring patterns. It was a feat of pure deduction, described later as one of the greatest intellectual achievements of the war. But deduction was not enough. The volume of traffic was too vast, the calculations too heavy. To break Lorenz regularly, the British would need machines faster than thought itself. In the winter of 1943, under the direction of engineer Tommy Flowers, the Colossus was built at the Post Office Research Station in Dollis Hill. It was the world's first programmable electronic computer, a monstrous array of valves, relays, and glowing vacuum tubes. When it arrived at Bletchley Park, the men unloading it had no idea they were carrying the future on their backs. Colossus filled an entire room, humming like a living organism. When switched on, the glow of its valves painted the walls in warm amber light. The air smelled faintly of ozone and oil. Operators in uniform fed paper tape through its readers, the holes flickering like Morse ghosts. The machine processed thousands of characters per second, a speed previously unthinkable. The first time Colossus ran successfully, a hush fell over the room. The printer rattled to life, spitting out streams of decrypted text, German, perfect, intelligible. Tiltman picked up the sheet, read the first line, and smiled thinly. "We're inside their highest channel," he said. "They'll never believe it." From then on, the war's silent front began to speak in full sentences. The Lorenz decrypts revealed not only military movements but the very conversations between Hitler, Keitel, and Jodl, orders for entire campaigns, logistical schedules, raw numbers of men and tanks. It was intelligence of unimaginable value, codenamed Ultra. The information was fed to the Allied command through secret courier channels. Few ever knew its origin. Reports were disguised as reliable human intelligence or aerial reconnaissance. Even generals commanding divisions on the front line had no idea their decisions were guided by a machine glowing in a quiet hut in Buckinghamshire. The secrecy was total, and it came with a price. Operators could never speak of what they saw, not even to each other. Many lived for years believing their work had been unimportant. Some died without ever knowing how pivotal they had been. One such operator, Sarah Haywood, worked nights in Hut 6, transcribing Luftwaffe intercepts. Her shift began at dusk when the lamps flickered on and the heaters stuttered. She typed for 12 hours straight, feeding lines into code tables, marking repeats, counting characters. She never saw a battlefield, but through the cables and frequencies she heard the war breathing. Some nights she wept quietly at her desk, her tears smudging the ink. She would never know that one of her intercepts, a minor Luftwaffe transmission out of Lille, helped Bletchley predict the timing of Operation Citadel, the German assault at Kursk. That single clue altered the disposition of Soviet defenses and helped turn the tide on the Eastern Front. Such was the strange geometry of Bletchley Park, small acts echoing into history. Meanwhile, the tension between intelligence and secrecy deepened. In the Admiralty, officers often begged for faster decrypts, faster responses. "If we know the enemy's move," one admiral demanded, "why can't we stop it?" Commander Travis's reply was quiet but absolute. "Because if we move too fast, they'll know we're reading them." And then all this dies. The balance was maddening. Save lives today, or preserve the secret that might save millions tomorrow. No one slept easily under that weight. As 1943 wore on, Bletchley Park became the unseen architect of Allied victories. Ultra-decrypts guided the North African campaign, revealing Rommel's supply routes. They exposed the position of the Italian fleet, allowing Allied bombers to strike before the ships ever reached open water. And most critically, they fed into the planning of Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. By spring 1944, Lorenz decrypts confirmed that Hitler's high command remained convinced the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. That single illusion, maintained through deceptive radio traffic and the double-agent network codenamed Double Cross, was reinforced by Bletchley's knowledge of German thinking. The invasion's success would depend on it. The huts operated day and night. Colossus ran almost continuously, its operators swapping out reels and valves with surgical precision. The bombs, too, churned without pause, their gears spinning through billions of combinations. The air was hot, metallic, relentless. And yet beneath it all there was a sense of wonder, a knowledge that history was turning on their fingertips. When D-Day came, Bletchley Park was watching. Every coded message from the Normandy front, every German reaction, every desperate call from field commanders, all flowed into those small wooden huts. And as the Allies gained ground, the decrypts shifted in tone. Orders became frantic, fragmented. Command chains collapsed. Hitler's messages grew erratic, filled with rage and delusion. Through Lorenz, the Allies could read the collapse of the Third Reich in real time. It was during those final months that the most haunting intercept arrived. A message from Berlin to all remaining U-boat commands: no further contact possible, surface if out of fuel, destroy all cipher materials, Heil Hitler. The words printed out in the machine room. The operator stared at them, the rhythmic clatter of the teleprinter slowing to silence. Someone whispered, "It's over." But the war inside Bletchley Park did not end with that message. The secrecy endured. Files were locked, machines dismantled, records burned. The staff were sworn to silence for 30 years. Turing moved on to Manchester, his mind still chasing the next machine. Many of the women who had served returned to civilian life without a word, carrying the weight of history unspoken. In time, the huts fell quiet. The desks were cleared. Only the ghosts of typewriters and the smell of ink remained. The silent front, the war of ciphers and wires, faded into legend. But the intercept that changed the war, the night when rooms fell silent, remained the moment when the impossible became real, when thought itself became a weapon, and the future of the world was decided not by armies but by those who listened. The rain had returned to Buckinghamshire, the same whispering drizzle that had fallen the night the first intercept shook the war. But this time the air inside Bletchley Park was different, taut, electric, aware. It was the spring of 1944, and everything they had fought for, everything they had endured, led to this, Operation Overlord. In the shadowed corners of Hut 6, Hut 8 and Hut 11A, the whispering machines never stopped. The bombs churned, the Colossus glowed, and the analysts bent over reams of ciphertext that carried within them the pulse of the coming invasion. Every breath, every sound, every drop of rain outside seemed to synchronize with the heartbeat of history. The Germans had fortified the western coast of Europe with concrete and steel, the Atlantic Wall, Hitler's fortress against the sea. The Wehrmacht command was confident. They believed the Allies would strike at Calais, the shortest route from England, not at Normandy. And that belief was no accident. For months, the deception plan Operation Fortitude had been weaving a grand illusion. Double agents fed false intelligence to the Abwehr. Fake radio traffic described armies that didn't exist. Dummy landing craft bobbed harmlessly along English shores. But behind the masquerade, one truth mattered most: what the German High Command actually believed. That truth could only be known through the intercepts from Bletchley Park. Each morning, couriers from the WWII service arrived on motorcycles, their saddlebags heavy with intercepted signals. Damp paper, ciphered orders, fragments of the German mind. Inside Bletchley's huts, the night shift met the day shift like changing tides. Teacups rattled. Typewriters clacked. The smell of wet wool and ozone filled the air. Alan Turing had left Bletchley for a new post, but his legacy, the machines, the logic, the discipline, lived on. The operators and analysts now worked as a single organism, driven by a single question. Did the enemy still believe Calais was the target? The answer arrived one evening through the Lorenz Intercept channel, decrypted by Colossus account, the new, faster machine running nearly continuously in Hut 11A. The printer rattled as the decrypted message spilled out, letter by letter, the ink still wet. When the operator read it aloud, the room fell silent. Führer directive confirms primary defensive strength to remain Calais sector. No reassignment of Panzer divisions southward permitted. It was confirmation. Hitler still believed in the illusion. Normandy's defenses would remain secondary. The window of opportunity was real, but narrow. The message was rushed to General Eisenhower's headquarters under the highest secrecy. A courier car sped through the night, its headlights covered, the envelope marked Top Secret Ultra. When Eisenhower read the intercept in his tent at Southwick House, he exhaled slowly. "Then we go," he said. In the weeks that followed, Bletchley Park became the nerve center of a silent countdown. Every new German order, every intercepted signal was weighed against the ticking clock of invasion. Messages from weather stations, from radar outposts, from U-boat command, all were pieces of a vast invisible puzzle. On the night of June 4, 1944, a storm swept across the channel. Winds howled. Waves rose like walls. The invasion was delayed. Inside the huts, tempers frayed. They had decrypted a message suggesting that the 15th Army near Calais remained on alert. The deception was still holding, but for how long? 2 nights later, the rain cleared. The wind fell, and Bletchley received the most fateful intercept of all, a weather transmission from a Luftwaffe station in Brittany, encrypted but routine, contained within its code group an unintentional gift, a signal confirming low cloud and poor visibility along the French coast. To the Germans, it meant calm. To the Allies, it meant cover. At 23:59 on June 5th, as paratroopers boarded their aircraft and landing craft began to slip from English ports, the last Lorenz decrypt of the night came through. It was brief, a situation report from German intelligence. Enemy preparations in southern England appear diversionary. Primary threat remains Calais. When the message finished printing, the operator turned to her supervisor. "They still don't know," she said softly. The supervisor nodded. "They will." Hours later, on the beaches of Normandy, the world changed. The intercept that spoke to the sea at dawn on June 6th, while gunfire thundered across the channel. The huts of Bletchley Park were quiet except for the steady hum of the bombs. Operators leaned close to their headphones, listening to the static, waiting for the German response. The first signals began to arrive around Borough 6 Crows. Panicked, fragmented, desperate. Enemy landings confirmed. Sector Normandy. Request immediate reinforcement. The words spilled from machines like the pulse of a breaking heart. Each intercept was decrypted within minutes. Each message relayed to the Allied command at Southwick, where Admiral Ramsey and General Eisenhower plotted their next moves. Through those lines, Bletchley Park watched the invasion unfold hour by hour, almost breath by breath. In Hut 3, intelligence officers tracked German command structures unraveling in real time. Entire divisions were paralyzed, waiting for orders that never came. The intercept showed the German confusion spreading like a contagion. The High Command believed Normandy was a feint. They refused to release the panzer divisions near Calais, waiting for an attack that would never come. In the smoke and blood of the beaches, at Omaha, Juno, Sword, Utah, and Gold, the cost was terrible. But the deception held. For 72 hours, Hitler's reserves stayed frozen in place. Bletchley Park had won a battle without a single bullet fired. Inside Hut 11A, the operators of Colossus II continued their work. The air was thick with heat from the glowing valves. Sweat beaded on their faces. They knew what the intercepts meant, not in abstraction but in human life. Every delayed panzer, every misdirected order, meant men surviving another hour on the beach. One operator later wrote, "We didn't hear the gunfire, but we could feel it through the wires." Shadows and sacrifice as the invasion deepened, new intercepts told a darker story. The SS divisions were mobilizing. The Germans began transmitting emergency field ciphers, fast, crude replacements for their compromised Enigma systems. Bletchley cracked them almost immediately. Each message brought grim news: burning villages, counterattacks, retreats. By mid-June, Hitler finally realized the truth. He ordered the panzer divisions south, but by then it was too late. The beachheads had fused into a solid line and the Allied push was unstoppable. Every German order, every logistical request, every cry for ammunition flowed through the same channels Bletchley had mastered. The machine rooms of Buckinghamshire became the ear of the Allied war machine, and yet within the park itself there was no triumph. The intercept that had changed the war, the one that had told them no reassignment southward permitted, was never spoken of. It was locked away, stamped, filed, sealed. Only a handful of people even knew it had existed. For the Codebreakers, victory came not with cheers but with exhaustion. After D-Day, the work continued without pause. The Germans changed ciphers again. The bombs were pushed harder. Colossus III came online faster still. The war was not yet won, but in that moment, for the first time, it was winnable. The price of silence, outside the park. The public saw only the headlines: Allied forces land in France. They did not see the flickering lights of Hut 11A, or the tired faces of operators reading intercepts until dawn. They did not hear the silence that fell each time a message revealed another human tragedy. Bletchley's workers were bound by secrecy even as victory unfolded around them. When they saw the newsreels of Normandy, they sat in cinemas with strangers unable to speak, knowing they had read the enemy's orders before the generals who gave them. It was a strange, proud loneliness, a victory with no applause. The Codebreakers buried their exhaustion beneath routine. Tea breaks, cigarettes, the smell of oil from the machines, the clatter of the teleprinter was their only applause. The war had entered its final act, but they could not see its ending yet. They only saw the next message, the next code, the next shadow on the line. And through it all, the intercepts continued to arrive. Fewer now, shorter, the voice of a collapsing empire. The Reich was shrinking, its orders fractured, its once mighty radio net reduced to whispers. But the memory of that night, the intercept that confirmed Calais, remained sacred. The night the machines spoke and the world changed. Aftermath: in August 1944, Paris was liberated. By winter, Allied troops were crossing into Germany itself. The Lorenz traffic grew erratic, then stopped altogether. On May 7, 1945, the final message from Berlin arrived, a single, terse signal to all German forces. Cease operations immediately. The war is over. When that message printed at Bletchley, no one spoke. Operators stood still, the air heavy with 1,000 unshed thoughts. Some cried quietly. Others simply turned off their machines one by one. The hum faded, replaced by a silence that felt endless. Commander Travis walked the length of the huts that night. He stopped outside each one, Hut 6, Hut 8, Hut 11A, and listened. For the first time in years, there was no sound. No bombs, no printers, no whispers, only the wind and the rain. Inside Hut 8, the photograph still hung on the wall, the merchant ship entering Liverpool harbor, the penciled words, "Because of you, we lived." Travis looked at it, touched the frame, and left it there, hidden. But for that one night when a message crossed the channel and rooms fell silent, The world had turned on thought alone, and thought had prevailed. The war ended, but the silence did not. When the guns ceased and the skies cleared, the victors returned home to parades, medals, and applause. Yet at Bletchley Park there were no celebrations, only locked doors, sealed files, and whispered farewells. The huts that had once trembled with the hum of machines now stood quiet, their windows clouded with dust, their floors littered with forgotten pencil shavings. The war of minds had been won, but it would not be spoken of. In May 1945, under orders from the highest levels of the Admiralty, the Codebreakers of Bletchley were summoned one by one. Each received a document stamped in crimson, Official Secrets Act, lifetime obligation. They were told to speak to no one, not even family, of what they had done. Many burned their notes that night, watching years of work dissolve into ash. Some cried. Others stood silently, the flames reflected in their eyes. It was the final encryption, the burial of truth itself. For Alan Turing, victory was bittersweet. He had seen what machines could do, how logic could defeat tyranny, and he could not stop thinking about what came next. In a small laboratory in Manchester, he began sketching the architecture for a new kind of mind, one that could learn, reason, and think. If a machine can decrypt, he once said quietly, it can also understand. But history, like code, can be cruel. The very man who had helped save millions was soon treated as an outcast. His secrets, not of war but of himself, became his undoing. The country he had served in silence turned against him. His death in 1954 cast a long shadow over Bletchley's legacy. Those who had known him kept his memory alive in the only way they could, by saying nothing. For decades, the name Bletchley Park disappeared from the public record. Government archives were sealed. Ultra was buried beneath layers of classification. The veterans of the park lived ordinary lives, teachers, clerks, mothers, mathematicians. Some married, some never spoke of the war again. One WWII operator, interviewed 50 years later, said, "My husband thought I'd been a typist. I suppose in a way I was. The ghosts of the huts, the physical remnants of Bletchley began to decay. The wooden huts rotted in the damp English air. Vines crept through the cracks. The great mansion, once filled with the murmur of secrets, became an empty shell. The government had no use for it now. There were plans to demolish it, to build housing in its place. But some could not let it die. Former workers, now old and gray, began to meet in quiet reunions. They spoke little of the codes, even then old habits held firm. But they remembered the nights, the laughter, the fear, the camaraderie. They remembered how in the darkest hours the light from the huts had seemed like hope itself. One of them, Betty Webb, wrote in her diary, "We lived in silence for 50 years. Perhaps that is why I still hear the machines when it rains." It was only in 1974, nearly 3 decades after the war, that the truth finally began to surface. A former officer named Frederick Winterbotham published the Ultra Secret, the first public revelation of the work done at Bletchley Park. The world was astonished. Historians reeled. The question spread like wildfire. Had the war's outcome truly been decided not by armies but by mathematicians? The answer, whispered through declassified archives, was yes. The weight of the invisible. Once the truth emerged, historians began to reassess everything. The sinking of convoys, the timing of battles, the strange Allied foresight. It all made sense now. The intercept that changed the war, that single decrypted message from 1941 that revealed the U-boat ambush, had not just saved a convoy. It had opened the door to Ultra. Without it, the Atlantic would have starved Britain. Without Britain, D-Day could not have launched. Without D-Day, Europe might never have been freed. The chain of logic stretched backward through time, like a code unraveled. A careless German operator, a spark of genius in Hut 8, a message that silenced a room, and a war forever changed. But the legacy of Bletchley Park was more than victory. It was the beginning of a revolution in thought. From its machines, the bombs, the Heath Robinsons, and finally Colossus, came the blueprint for modern computing. Every line of code, every algorithm that followed traced its lineage back to those huts. The digital age was born not in Silicon Valley, but in the damp gardens of Buckinghamshire. And yet, even as technology advanced, the moral weight of Bletchley's work endured. They had built the tools of omniscience, Machines that could listen, predict, and outthink human beings. It was a power that demanded restraint. Many who had served there lived their lives with a quiet caution, wary of what such power might become in the wrong hands. In the late 1990s, when the British government finally declassified much of the Ultra material, journalists and scholars flooded the archives. They found pages yellowed with age, ink blurred by time, the handwriting of young women who had once changed the world. They found the names of ships saved, convoys rerouted, lives preserved, but they also found the unspoken cost, the messages that went unheeded, the sacrifices made to protect the secret. Victory through silence, one file was labeled. It was perhaps the truest epitaph Bletchley Park could have. The return of voices in the early 2000s, restoration began. Volunteers, historians, and veterans' descendants rebuilt the huts, restoring the machines from fragments of metal and memory. When the lights flickered on again inside Hut 8, the air seemed to hum with ghosts. Visitors walked the creaking floors, gazing at the recreated desks, the typewriters, the rows of teleprinters. They read the stories of those who had once worked there. Joan Clark, brilliant and reserved. Mavis Beatty, who cracked Italian naval codes. Bill Tutt, who saw through the heart of Lorenz. Sarah Haywood, the anonymous operator who never knew she'd saved thousands. And at the center of it all, Alan Turing's desk, a simple wooden table with a teacup ring etched into its surface. People placed flowers there, letters, notes of gratitude. Some knelt, some wept. For the first time in history, the silent front was being heard. In 2012, the British government formally apologized for Turing's treatment, acknowledging his role in the victory that saved Europe. 2 years later, The Imitation Game brought his story to cinema screens worldwide. For a brief moment, the world looked back into the fog of war and saw what had been hidden. Not just machines, but humanity, fragile, flawed, and magnificent echoes that never fade today. The huts still stand. The rain still falls. The lake at Bletchley Park reflects the same clouds that hung over it in 1941. Tourists walk where giants once whispered. The machines no longer run, but if one listens closely, the air still vibrates with memory. The faint clatter of typewriters, the rhythmic clicking of bombs, the murmurs of voices saying, "Try again, one more permutation, one more chance." Every advance in technology, every encrypted message sent across the world, carries in it a trace of those nights when humanity first spoke in code to itself. And somewhere in that endless dialogue between secrecy and discovery, the heartbeat of Bletchley Park continues. It was not merely an intercept that changed a war. It was an idea that changed the world, that thought itself could be a weapon, that silence could speak louder than bombs, and that the smallest act of understanding could reshape the course of history. As the last of the veterans passed, they left behind no medals, no monuments of marble, only memories and the quiet conviction that knowledge, once awakened, cannot die. The rain falls, soft as static on the rooftops of Bletchley Park. Inside the huts, where light once burned through the darkest years of mankind, the rooms are still. But if you listen, truly listen, you can almost hear it. The whisper of the intercept, the breath between the clicks, the sound of a world changing forever.